get that going. Yep, that's good. Okay, so I'll talk through my palette. There's always 5 colours that are always on my palette every time, whatever I'm painting, whether I'm outdoors doing a portrait, and then I add to them in different circumstances, like a Marmite jar where you need that very bright yellow. So I always have the titanium white. That's the white that I choose to use. It's got a bit of warmth to it. There's zinc white available, there's others, but I always go for the titanium, so that's always on there. And now it's 2 o'clock, now we're officially started. And I always have yellow ochre on there. I always have the cadmium red, which is a very strong red. I should have got these squeezed on here before, I don't know, but the day just suddenly disappeared.
Because you're explaining which colours you're using.
That's right.
That's good.
So we've got those 3, we've got the white, the yellow ochre, the cadmium red, and then I have burnt umber, that's the brown that I use, and then ultramarine blue is the blue I use, and those 2 kind of combined give me a very, very dark black really, which I can then push into the warmer areas of a black with using the burnt umber, and or the cooler with the ultramarine blue. So it's a useful combination. So those 5 on the palette, and I can mix up. I've got this canvas here. This is actually 84 colours. This is the Zorn palette. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Zorn palette, but it's the yellow ochre, the cadmium red, and then it's an ivory black, and then the titanium white, and you can create all those colours from those 4. And you think 2 of those are, black and white. It's quite impressive. It's a very similar palette that I'm using there. Just instead of the black, I've got the blue and the brown. And then in this case, as I said, we've got the Marmite jar. I'm not going to be able to create that yellow with the yellow ochre, so I'm going to use, tip these out, it's easier. Some lemon yellow in this case. I'll use that, and that will be able to achieve what I need to do there. Okay, and I'll just crack onto it, and I'll talk through what I'm doing as I go. So I've got a variety of brushes here. I like buying brushes. I've got way too many. All sizes, all shapes. I don't have any particular go-to. Rosemary & Co brushes as a brand are very good. But as long as they're quality brushes, then that's the important thing. Same with the paints really. There's loads out there on the market, but quality materials make a big difference. So, if you can't see or you need to move, feel free. It's just nice and relaxed. And also, I'll take questions as we go. It's nice to have a bit of a conversation rather than just listening to my voice the whole time. So feel free to ask questions. That would be really useful. I think that would be useful for everybody. So the surface that I'm painting on, in this case, this is oil painting paper, and I've given it a very light ground there, just to take away the white, and that's just thinned down burnt umber there. I use all different surfaces. If you look around, you'll see a lot of wooden boards, slightly bigger sizes. I go to stretched canvas and football shirts in some cases as well. That's the unusual one. But, so to begin with, with oil paints, very forgiving medium, like I say. So I've thinned down the paint using a medium, and there's loads of different mediums out on the market. I use one called Zest It. There's those going. I might just tilt that. Oh, stick it that way. Yeah, so I thinned down with the medium. a medium that you can use to clean your brushes, and so it's a very loose. I can move the paint around, and it's very thin at this point, so that I can build up layers and paint over these initial sketch marks, and kind of almost the scaffolding. So I'm going to look for my centre point here, just give myself a guide, and then I can start looking at the width of this object and almost box in the top, the bottom, and the width. So now I've put that top and bottom in. It's in relation to there, to that. This is a very strange experience for me because I've done many demos, but never with my children in the room. So I keep turning around and seeing, and they're listening. This is great. 5 minutes in. Just see how that goes for the rest of the session. So I kind of box in the object there, and already then you can start making judgments straight away about the placement of it, the composition. I can already determine whether it's too tall or too wide or not wide, without doing any detail. I'll do the same with the portraits, and I'll do the same when I'm in the landscape. Just some very simple, try to simplify everything. That's kind of the key. So straight away I would probably suggest that, and I'll just use my eye to make the judgment, but you can measure. So if I measured, for example, I feel like this is too tall already and not wide enough, but let's just have a little look. That's not too bad, maybe just a little bit wider here. And then from there, I can start looking at, I could break it down, keep it simple again, so where the lid, I could just give myself a line here. This object is going to look very different for everybody from where you're positioned. So if you get a chance at the end and you're interested, come and stand where I'm stood and see the view. So again, like I say, simplify the object. And then I can start sketching into that area. It's just guidelines really, they're all going to be gone. Now that lid is narrower than the body of the jar, so let's say somewhere like there. This is a bit of a favourite subject of mine, the Marmot jar. I've come back to it a few times, but I like being able to just grab things, in the house, and I feel like painting. I love to paint from life. It's quite key to a lot of my work. Not exclusively, I will use photos, especially portraits. It's not always practical to have a model, but if you can get one, it's very useful. Do a lot of life drawing, and kind of that practicing of that observational practice is pretty vital to my work. So I'm just looking at the angle of the jar, and again just breaking it down into simple lines at this stage. Probably can come a little bit wider, and then something like that. And I can just round that off once I'm satisfied.
How have you decided how high to put it on the whole piece of paper?
In this case, I didn't give it too much consideration because this isn't going to be a final painting, if you like. But in general, it depends on the subject really and what you've got. It's unusual just to have one object in a life drawing. I tend to have at least three, in which case you've arranged them, and so you're taking into consideration a balance between those three objects and then a balance of space around them.
Yes,
so there's a few things to consider. The overall final image of this particular painting is probably going to be more square than portrait.
Okay.
But you know, I can trim the bottom of the page, and it's quite solvable and from that point of view. So yeah, so they're the kind of things I would consider if it was a bigger setup, and I have in the past, you know, even with the wooden boards, made compositional decisions after doing the painting. I think something doesn't quite work. The Camden lock painting was originally the same size as that traffic light painting to the right of it, but there was not a lot going on at the bottom once I kind of assessed it and I finished. So I decided to kind of chop it off, a little bit at the top, a little bit at the bottom, and kind of focus in on that bridge. So yeah.
How did you cut it?
I'll just use an electric saw, actually, just with a very fine blade. Yeah. It was a bit unnerving, but actually there's a YouTube video of the process. So I talk through that decision making, and then I do show you. So yeah, if you search my name in YouTube, if you're bored, and you want it, then yeah, you'll be able to see that. So yes, yeah, so it's kind of simplified that jar into straight lines, and it makes creating that roundness a lot easier. And then we've got the bottom here. So I'm just using the burnt umber and the ultramarine blue here, kind of a mix of the two, like I say, thinned down at this stage. And then there's a lovely shadow from my angle that's just heading off in this direction. And then the other thing I want to bring into this is the join of the table and the wall, as I'll kind of call them in this instance. So I'm looking at where there's an angle. It's kind of, if I hold the brush, it's kind of here. So I'm just having a look at where that line interacts with the jar, and then where it's coming out the other side, and trying to keep that angle something like that. And that's kind of there in terms of the sketching out stage. I could give myself a bit more information, so I could look at the label. Somewhere like that. But that's probably enough information that I need to then go into the blocking in stage. So I would block in, and again I just try to keep things simple really, simplified at this stage. Let's get a slightly bigger brush. And what do we feel like? Let's go with that one. So I'm looking at the largest areas, and then going to work my way down to the smaller areas. If you were, I was going to say, if you'd like some seats, you work here, you know where the seats are. So I'm working from the largest areas, and I'm going to work my way down to the smallest areas. So I can make a quick judgment and make a decision to go with this background first. So we've got this grey card. It's kind of a mid-tone grey, so I'm just going to mix that up with a bit of the ultramarine blue and the burnt umber, and then add in some of the white to that. That'll give me a nice grey. It's kind of heading towards the blue side of grey in places. I'd suggest that warm light changes it a little bit, but always looks different on your palette to when you put it on the surface. So just, it's good practice to just try a little area, and I'm really most interested in getting the tone as accurate as possible at this stage, and actually throughout the stages. I can forgive the colour not being spot on, but the tone, trying to get the tone as accurate as possible will really help. So how light or dark something is will really help in terms of producing a convincing subject. And convincing, I mean convincing in terms of it looking like what I want it to look like, bless you. I like my paintings to look like the subject, but I also like them to look like a painting still. So I hope that when you look around at the work, you can see the brush marks in some cases, and that's kind of what I'm aiming for. So I'm just blocking in this background. There's not going to be much variety to that. But
Do we put the background in first?
no, it's more about the largest area.
Oh, okay.
And it just happens to be the background in this case. Yeah, so it's not necessarily. If I'm working on if I'm doing a life drawing, for example, or I've got a sitter portrait, I'll concentrate on the portrait. So the largest areas of tone in the subject. But getting the background in this painting will help.
Yeah.
That's 15 minutes, quarter of the way through. And I use each stage, so this blocking in stage, so the paint's a bit thicker than it was for the sketch. Yeah, so sorry, I use each stage to continually assess that initial drawing and make corrections. So the top of this jar has gone a little bit brown there, less blue than I would like, but I won't worry too much. Let's get it down there. Yeah, so I'm using this blocking in to just affect the drawing and make corrections if necessary. And so I'm always looking. Looking is so key, and checking and not necessarily trusting what you first observe and put down. It's always useful to, I'm not going to be doing it in this case, but it's always useful to step away from your work and not look at it for a while. Take photos of your work and look at it through your phone. Gives you a new kind of perspective on it, and you can spot things that are not quite right. So
You mixing your colours with a brush rather than with a knife?
I am, yeah.
Okay.
I sometimes use a knife if I need a large amount of paint. If I'm working on a portrait and I'm getting the like a skin tone mixed up, I know I'm going to be using a lot of it, then I might use the knife to do that. But it's a bit of a speed, it's for the speed as well.
So then you need to change the brush when you...
Yeah, I mean I try to keep it as clean as possible. So I have a bit of kitchen roll here.
Oh.
So if I'm using the same brush but I'm cleaning it, I'll wipe as much paint off as possible on the kitchen roll, and then I will use the medium to clean the brush, and then again wipe that on the kitchen roll. So it's it's quite vital really to be either very good at cleaning your brushes as you go or changing the brushes, because with oil paint it can become muddy quite quickly. Right, let's get that in. Probably should have used a bigger brush there, but it's probably a little bit thinner than I would like, but that's okay, I'll go with that. It's more of a wash. Okay, so the next biggest shape for me would be the table down here. I'm not going to block all of that in, but I will do a little bit. Again for speed, but there's a lovely blue shadow heading off in this direction from the jar, and that's very similar mix of colours to what I just used, so I'm just adding some white to that because tonally it's not as dark, and that's kind of sitting in here. I've just crept into the drawing of the jar there, but that's okay. It's quite interesting, if you're interested in this kind of thing. I find it quite interesting that there is this blue shadow going off to the right of the jar, and then there's a much warmer, almost orange shadow going to the left of the jar because of the different light sources. So it's the skylight that's creating that orange shadow. No, it's not. It's not. There's a light source, but it could be. But I've got a very warm light behind here, which is creating a very cool shadow on this side. But yeah, again, if you get a chance to come and have a look at that, it's those little details that can make a big difference in still lifes, noticing the temperature of things like that, the shadow, and it just continues this blue. So I will get that in now actually. Let's get that cooler one, and I will change my brush for speed. So I used some of the yellow ochre and some burnt umber to create this shadow, maybe a bit of the red. The cadmium red is really strong colour. It was described to me once as a palette bully, and I thought that was a really good way to describe it, because you only need a little bit, you're just adding, and if you go, you can easily put too much into a mix of colour, and it bullies its way in, and you end up having to use loads of paint or start again with your mix. But every single time I grab a bit of cadmium red, I think of that now. So again, it's the tone and the colour I'm looking at here. That's a bit too dark tonally, so I'll add a bit of white and a bit more yellow ochre. That's more like it. So this is the shadow that's sitting under the jar on this side. So I said about blocking in the largest and going down. I'm not doing that in this case, but that's okay. You can break it's not a rule. And it kind of felt like it made sense at the time with that shadow to the right being the same kind of colour mix as that background. And also, actually, the ground that I've got there is not far off what I'd be looking for the blocking in of this table. It's a white piece of wood, but again, the warm light gives it a bit of warmth there, but I will just add a bit of more paint there. And then we get into the really fun bit, which is the Marmite jar. This blue shadow out to the right as well, it starts quite sharp here, and then it really softens as it disappears further off the side of this particular canvas. But I love the way the shadow does that. It just kind of disappears. If this was wider, I'd be able to show that there, but that will do for the tabletop. And again, this is much softer edge where this shadow disappears from the jar. And as it meets the wall, it's bit more like that. Okay, I've lost some of my width of my jar as I've been doing that blocking in, but I can bring that back. Like I say, it's very forgivable medium, and I'll go thicker with the paint mix now as well. and that will just sit on top of that paint that I put in there nicely. So the next big shape, it could be the lid, probably is the next biggest blocking in shape, but I'm not going to go with the lid because it's a very light colour, that yellow. If I do that and then I try to do the jar and I grab bits of it, and the yellow pollutes that paint. So it's just thinking about the logical process as well. You can paint light colours on top of dark colours much easier than the other way around. So I will do the dark colour here, and then I'll be able to do the lid a lot easier. So it's kind of black, but there's loads going on in there, and I'll really observe the reflection of the white table is reflected in this part of the jar around here. It's very blue, it's very warm around here. There's almost a bit of transparency because there's not much Marmite left in that jar. I've been having Marmite sandwiches all week. So there's a little bit of transparency there, which I can see from here. So there is variations, but I'll block in the average overall colour, and then I can work into that. So again, a little mix of the ultramarine blue and the burnt umber, but a little bit more of the burnt umber, so it's on the warmer side of a black. Maybe grab a little bit of the red as well. Let's see. Yeah, that kind of thing. Now I want this to be quite thick, so I'm not adding any medium to this mix. This is just purely the oil paint as it comes out of the tube. Every colour is different as well, the consistency, and every brand is different, but in terms of how oily or not it is. But so it's not, there's no transparency really going on there, which is nice. So again, I'm still looking at the drawing side of things. So I really want to look at that curve that is created by the jar, not just completely trust what I've already drawn, because I may have been inaccurate with that first observation. And again, there's lovely blue as you creep round here, but I'll put that as the jar kind of disappears around, but I'll put that in later. Let's get this blocked in. So I can see a lot more of the jar on this side. The label for me is over to the right. There's a slight angle to the jar as I look at it. So I'm just bearing that in mind as well as I kind of approach this part of the painting. It's a very thin line really, so I'm just turning the brush on its side to achieve that as it comes around. Really need to load that brush up with paint because I don't want this to be polluted by any of the paint that's already on the surface. And then round this side, as I say, I can see more of the side of the jar, so I'm looking at the label and that kind of comes around here. Just grabbed a little bit of medium there, just to give a bit more flow, but still the paint's nice and thick. Now, as I pointed out, the reflection of that table is creating a very bluey black around here. So I'm just going to do that now, actually, rather than blocking, because it's a very obvious change. So, and I might just emphasise it a little bit, make the tone a little bit lighter, just to make it really obvious to the viewer. Not over the top. I don't want it to look unnatural, but I want there to be a clear difference between this and that. Just talking through my thinking as I do it. It's the sort of thing I'm kind of thinking about, or reasoning, I suppose. Yeah, I want to bring this shadow in. I think the shape of the jar is more like how I've painted it there, so they're not quite meeting, but we'll solve that. And then let's get this.
To change that
Oil paint is very, it doesn't change much. It's quite, compared to acrylic, when you put acrylic down, you find it's much darker when it dries. It's much more trustworthy. There will be a change, but it's not as noticeable as other mediums. Yeah, it's one of the things I like about it, actually. It's
What is the medium that you're using?
So I use something called Zest-It, which is this stuff here. It's the equivalent of a turpentine white spirit. But it's got a lovely kind of citrusy smell, that one. So it's good for indoor painting. I know some artists will add oil, they'll have some oil that they'll add into their kind of their paint mixture. I don't tend to do that. I think I paint quite quickly in a lot of scenarios, especially the plein air stuff. I've got used to painting quite quickly, so I just have the medium and I use that to change the thickness of the paint, really. Okay, I don't want to get into that detail yet. Got sucked into that. So the next thing to block in, it's still kind of blocking in at this stage, is the lid. It's actually looking a little bit too big now. So what I'm going to do is just going to use some of that background. It's I feel like this needs to. Again, it's like I was saying, just questioning the drawing all the time and making corrections if necessary as we go along. Let's bring that in there. More like that. So the yellow. It's a very, very narrow tonal range in this lid. The light is kind of shining on the whole lid and it's very, like I say, but there's difference in temperature. There's some warmth as you come around this side, and the top of the lid actually is it's got a greenness to it. So there's just a couple of things I'm observing when looking, and then to describe that shape and that three-dimensionality to it, there's actually a real yellowness to the outside rim It's very noticeable. So that's just some things there that I'm looking at and we'll try to achieve to create that that illusion really, because that's what you're trying to do. Oh, 25 minutes to go. So I'm using the lemon yellow. I'm using a little bit of the yellow ochre. And I'll be using some of the, a little bit of the cadmium red. I like these brands. I've done some baked beans here. I've done the Marmite jar many times. I've done Coke bottles, traditional glass Coke bottles. I like the design element of the objects on the label, and just the familiarity of them as subjects. Not alone in that. I've seen many Marmite paintings out there. It's quite a popular subject, I should say. So there's a bit more warmth around there actually. This is rather than blocking in the whole lid in one go, I'm looking at those three things that I mentioned, the warmth and then the greenness on the top. And I'll just go straight into trying to record those. That's more like it in terms of warmth. So again, the paint's very thick at this point. Hardly any medium, if any, actually. And in a situation like that, where that yellow is meeting that dark colour, and I've picked up a little bit on my brush, just being aware of things like that as you go with oil paint. I need to deal with that. If I start trying to put that back into that colour, that's where you get muddy. And so I'm just wiping that off, a little bit of the medium, and again the kitchen roll, and then that brush is good to go. It's just a little practical tip really for oil painting. Okay, so that's the warmth. Then it comes around to this more greeny yellow around this side. So it's quite subtle. I might just push it a little bit, just again to emphasise the point. Bless you. You allergic to oil paint? So tonally very similar, but the difference, like I say, is kind of the temperature of the colour. So it's much cooler green around this side compared to the warmer orange on the other side. And then they kind of meet in the middle there. I don't know how obvious that is from where you're sat, but if you get closer and have a look after you, just see the difference there. And then the top is more of that greeny, slightly darker. Let's get a bit more of that. That's probably applied a little bit thinner than I would like, but that's okay for the purposes. And then, yeah, very yellow rim, which is, it's going to be thinner around the back there and thicker around this front edge. And actually, the lemon yellow that I've squeezed out there is not going to achieve it, so I'm just going to grab what I can get out of that one, which is a cadmium yellow, which I think, yeah, that's going to be the one, and that'll be useful in the label as well. Should have thought about that before I picked Marmite. Actually, you can see I've used a great tube ringers. Don't know if you've seen these. Get every last bit. They're ideal. I haven't got it with me, but
I see as you want to.
good for your toothpaste as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to hold the palette up and just show you the difference in those yellows. It's really does make a big difference. Hopefully you'll be able to see, but the difference between the lemon yellow here and then that cadmium yellow there.
Yep.
I don't know how you describe that difference. I don't know if you can see that. But that will be very helpful. So I need that. Still going to need, I think, just add a little bit of the red to that. And still a little bit of the yellow ochre as well. It's worth spending time just mixing your colours. Try to be as accurate as possible, but the width of this brush is just perfect for this front rim. And then I'm going to need a thinner brush just around that back edge. Something like that. It's not fully there, but just push that green on the top a little bit more, or the greeny yellow.
If you were setting this up at home,
Yeah.
would you have just one light source or?
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's nice sometimes to have two alternate light sources, but yeah, you've got the opportunity. That's the lovely thing with still life setup, is you can spend some time playing with the lights and seeing what looks interesting. Yeah, compared to I mean, you can do that in other scenarios as well, but certainly not with plein air painting. You give them what you got in that case, but yeah, it's one of the plus points. And then this is a little bit darker around here. I'm just going to suggest a little bit that detail in the rim. Okay, don't want to spend too much time just on this lid, because let's get into the label. They're thicker than I would like, but they're kind of suggesting a little bit of the texture. Okay, so while we've got the yellow on the brush, and we'll get into that label. Actually, I can't look at that edge anymore. I need to sort that out very quickly. And then that's done, just where this meets. This shadow meets the jar. Let's just bring that in. And then very dark point where they meet along the base here. That's better already, just getting rid of that white. It just sits down on the table there. And yes, so this label. So I've got the yellow on the brush already. So I'm looking at the shape of the logo, the Marmite ribbon at the top. So we've got, again, you've got to be very careful. It's that yellow and the black. So I've picked up a little bit there, so it's cleaning the brush and loading it with more paint. So I'm just using this paint to kind of do the drawing as well as the filling in, the blocking in. So I'm looking at that. Come on. And it's very thin again, this yellow. Just the width of the brush, so the brush choice is important for this kind of stage. I can load it up with paint and it's kind of the width that I'm looking for, so I can just push that down on the surface. Rather than having a bigger brush that's got a point at the end and you're trying to delicately. Okay. Well, very quickly. So we've got the red. It's actually a bit dark. It's quite dark compared to the pure cadmium red out the tube. So I'm just mixing a little bit of the burnt umber in with that, and got two options here really at this point, because you've got that Marmite, the word Marmite. I'm not going to go in and draw every single letter accurately. I want to suggest really parts of this label. So I've got a choice. Do I block in this whole label red and then try to do the lettering over it, or do I try to kind of paint around and leave the space to then put that paint in? I think that's how I'm going to tackle it. So I'm just going to, again, just trying to share my painting. There's a lot of decision making that goes into creating a painting. You're planning ahead a lot of the time and thinking about the next problem that you're trying to solve.
If you had more time, do you ever let paint dry and then go back and paint?
I don't really, because I often paint in one session. Yeah, but that is certainly a method that is used, and oil paint or any medium. Yeah, that's doable. That said, it's not a rule that I don't do that, and I've been adding some figures this week to a painting that I painted years ago actually. So yeah, it's quite nice to do that at times. I quite like the result of working fast and working with quick decisions, it affects the mark making, which has come from the plein air painting really. So I think if I had endless time, then the painting becomes quite tight. But that's just me. That's just something I've learnt about my own kind of painting. So we've kind of got the outsides of that label there. We've got 10 minutes. I want to bring in some of the reflections into the jar. That's going to be important. So we'll get to where I get to with the label. But like I say, I'm suggesting it. So I'm just I can just kind of pick out, I'm painting the negatives of the letters at this stage. It's not that I want to be inaccurate, but I'm not overly concerned about being, like I say, tight. If I treated it like, I wanted to get it millimetre perfect, then the focus would become the word Marmite or whatever it is. So it's trying to get a balance, I suppose, of how much detail you're putting in, and but with such a kind of familiar object as well, subject, you can just kind of suggest it in this way, and the viewer can kind of fill in the rest. Okay, so that's okay. I'm happy with that. I will maybe work back into that in a second, but I'll just again say we've got the Marmite jar on the Marmite label, and I'm just suggesting it really, and it gets a bit lighter in this area. There's a bit of the handle, and it warms up in this and through here. Something like that, and that's in balance with the word Marmite. So as long as it's a language really, a visual language, as long as it's using the same language, then it should, in theory, work. That's the thinking. That's a very unnatural green. So that's another example of where I'm going to need something other than that standard palette that I started with. So I've got some Viridian green here, and that's going to do the job with some white. Almost, lovely with the white, and needs a bit of yellow in there. Bit too blue. Just get a bit more of the yellow ochre. That will dull it down a little bit. Not quite right, but it's close enough just for this purpose to get it on there. Again, the width of this particular brush is ideal, so I can really push that paint down. And that's pretty much there with the label. There's obviously words, or even much smaller words going on, which standing here I can read what those letters are. It's almost an eye test, the yeast extract, but I can make them out. But I wouldn't go through. And it's just my painting style really. It's like I say, it's the language that I've decided. If you're doing a photorealistic painting, then you would go in and do yeast extract here, but I can just suggest it. It's just personal preference really. It's what I like in other paintings. I like I like to see it's a painting. Something like that, it's there, but same with the green label. There's something going on in here. That's probably a bit over the top, but I couldn't have told you what those words were around there, even though I was so familiar with it. But I have just read vegan spread, which is good for me because I do eat a plant diet. I mean, I knew it was, but I didn't know it had it written on there. That might be a new thing, I don't know. It's very white in that label. I've still got the ground colour of the the paper there. But it's visibly whiter, this area, than the table. I say that, it's pretty close, but I'm just going to push it a little bit. Not that much, that's too much. Yeah. And I've just grabbed a bit of that green there, which was not intended, but I can just knock that back. But I should have done this stage before I suggested that letter in there, which that's okay. I'll just lose that and then Is Jed and Emily still here?
Not sleepless yet.
Are you? I would use that same colour and go into all the Marmite, but we're nearly there, so I won't bother with that now. If you go to my website, you will see a finished one I did earlier, and yeah. So, but there's just some highlights going on in here, which will just hopefully bring that to life a little bit. So, the blue. Say there's some blueness to this jar that disappears around here. It gives you some of the detail in and a bit more blue and less white. It's just more like that. I've pushed that. I hope, just to emphasise it a little bit. Just again here. And then quite thin, which just describes some of the shape of that jar just a little bit, and then it creeps around here and kind of disappears out the side of the jar there. And actually that whole edge here is very soft. It's quite sharp that I've got it there, so I think that will just help just bringing that around there. That just softens that edge a little bit. And then there's a couple of really warm highlights, which I'll just put in, and that will be the last thing. So nice and thick with the paint, because this is going to sit on top of paint that's already on the surface, and it's very light. I want it to some orangeness to it. It's picking up the lights above, really. That's what it is. And they're just sitting in. There's just a few spots. There's one on the rim, underneath the lid there, just. And just. There are 3 there. I mean, this stage of a painting, when you're adding highlights, it's always quite an enjoyable thing to do. And the temptation is, I'm going to keep doing that, and I'm going to keep adding highlights. But got to kind of go with what's there. Something like that. I think. I mean, there's loads that could be done with it, but that's kind of where we're going to get to in that 1 hour, and hopefully it shows you kind of the process that I go through for all of the work, really. That's sketching out the initial stages in paint, blocking in the bigger shapes and working your way to the smaller ones, and then adding some of the details that you see. So that's kind of it. So thank you very much for coming in. Thank you. Yeah, like I say,